Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Behrens, faculty member at Notre Dame. I just want to introduce Beth Covay Minor. She's going to talk about, we gave this book out that we did, so we're totally hawking our own work. But so Beth is at National Louis University. She's director of the Educational Leadership Studies program. She went to Notre Dame in sociology. She did IES postdoc at Penn. You were at Michigan State with the Michigan partnership with the State Department of Ed, and now at National Louis University. And I just want to do a shout out to Beth. So this book had been, Maureen Callahan's been dead over 10 years. I don't know if you know that. And this idea came up, I think, at one of these meetings, like we should do a book about her. Well, pandemic got in the way. Quite personally, I had a bunch of health issues that got in the way. Beth held it all together. And she deserves a lot of kudos. You know, put together, you think this is kind of easy because some of it's her published work and some of it's work that she presented in Paris, and it's kind of cool to see what she said to, to the French, but yet it takes so much work to get copyrights.
Yes.
And Beth was just tedious. Just did all this tedious work to make that happen and just kept this book on track. And when I got it in the mail, it was like, holy cow, this is kind of a hefty book all of a sudden. And so just a shout out to Beth. I'm so glad that you're going to be doing this. And so congratulations to you, and I guess all of us, but really, really to you. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Catherine, for inviting me to give this talk today and being flexible with my schedule. I wasn't the only minor who had a talk today. My youngest daughter had an All Saints Day program this morning, and so she gave a speech on St. Joan of Arc. So if anyone wants to see a video of that later, I have that. Or not, that's okay too. It's really sweet. I'm glad to be back at the Midwest Sociology of Education Conference. It's been a while since I was able to join, and I'm excited to be back at Notre Dame this fall to share with you the new book that I've been working on with Mark Behrens and Barbara Schneider. And the book is called Opportunities for Learning, A Sociological Perspective, and it's an edited volume of the work of Dr. Maureen T. Hallinan, the founding director of CREO at Notre Dame. And for those of you who don't know me, I was a CREO graduate student towards the end of Maureen's time as director. I remember the first time I met Maureen. I was not able to attend the prospective graduate student weekend, so I came on a separate weekend to visit the campus. And while I was having lunch with some sociology graduate students, she stepped out of a conference and came to meet me. At that time, I didn't know how her work would impact my time at Notre Dame or how it would shape my own research agenda. When I learned that I would be a CREO graduate student and working with her in my first year, she assured me that I would have a good experience at Notre Dame if I put my heart and soul into it. It's our hope that by publishing this edited volume, future generations of scholars will be impacted by Maureen's work and her vision for us as sociologists of education, and that they will see the heart and soul that Maureen put into her work. While those future generations of scholars will never experience those tough questions from Maureen challenging your theoretical argument or that look she might give you, they will certainly benefit from her scholarship and her call for us to formulate strong theory, conduct rigorous research, and to be at the forefront of the needs of education. Mark, Barbara, and I started this project a few years ago, and we gathered key articles that form the foundation of Maureen's work that we felt were essential for sociologists of education. However, we were able to expand upon these works. While the project was in progress, the sociology department moved from Flanner Hall, and so Mark got to go through all the papers that CREO still had of Maureen's, and in that process he found copies of additional work of Maureen's. For example, a lecture that she delivered at the centennial celebration of the International Institute of Sociology at the Sorbonne in Paris, and another keynote address she gave at her alma mater, Marymount College in New York. So not only does this volume include key academic work for Maureen and her co-authors, but also her voice and words of wisdom to future teachers and a call to social justice. Maureen's work was timely when she wrote it, but it's still timely today. I repeatedly see threads of her research as antecedents for work that we continue to do today. Topics like social network analysis, belongingness, and culturally relevant school culture. This afternoon, I will begin with a general overview of the book and Maureen's scholarship, incorporating some of Maureen's own words, and then I will move more Then I will talk more about her larger vision and end with how our work as sociologists of education should move forward. But first, I do want to thank, of course, my co-editors, Mark and Barbara, for their collaboration, work, and support to get the book published. I would also like to thank Natalie Meyerhofer and Kathleen Kennedy, who helped with the copyright clearances and preparing the manuscript itself to get it to the publisher. Like Mark said, this was not a small task, and we could not have done it without you, so thank you very much. And finally, to Notre Dame Press for publishing the book. So, what is in this book? A lot. We organized the content into 4 parts to get at the heart of Maureen's research. The first part is, of course, sociology of education. The second part includes social organization of schools and specifically Catholic education. Part 3 includes her work on ability grouping and tracking, and the final part focuses on peers and friendship. Each section contains discussion questions and additional suggested readings before we present the selection from Maureen's scholarship. You will also see a range of co-authors in these articles, from colleagues and graduate students to a long-standing collaboration with Warren Kubitschek. So first, sociology of education. The sociology of education section is an important anchor for the book because of the emphasis on theory, which lays the groundwork for rigorous research. What would Maureen consider to be good theory? Well, we can see from her work that it includes several things. 1, theory should be able to be used to explain inequality. The concepts should be brought out in a logical order and should be tied tightly together. 2nd, theory should be testable. To get from testable hypothesis, Maureen would share with us in our CREO seminars an article from 1967 by Charters. It was called The Hypothesis in Scientific Research. And through that article, Charters would take you from the theoretical proposition to the conceptual hypothesis and finally to the operational hypothesis. Charters states, the conceptual hypothesis is perhaps the single most important ingredient of a research study. It serves as the link between the world of explanation and theory and the world of phenomena and fact. It expresses the researcher's general ideas in testable form. So good theory starts with attempting to explain inequality and moves from theoretical to conceptual and operational so that we can actually test those theories. But good theory doesn't end there. Good theory should include struggle. Maureen says one of the greatest barriers to our producing good sociological theory is the assumption that the task should not involve struggle. When we experience difficulty, we feel inadequate and either abandon the task or lower our standards. Yet the reality is that it is not the absence of struggle that separates our best thinkers from the rest of us, but rather than their commitment to the task, their personal discipline, their determination, and their generosity in seeing their work to completion. So take a moment to let that sink in. One of the greatest barriers to our producing good sociological theory is the assumption that the task should not involve struggle. Our work is not and should not be easy. Maureen had high standards and expected all of us to meet them. The struggle is all part of the process. This quote also reminds me of a photograph that used to hang in the Coleman room in Flanner Hall when I was here. It was a picture from James Coleman's desk, and there were glasses sitting on top of a paper that had edits written all over it. It reminded me that even our greatest theorists struggled and revised and kept pushing through. It was a reminder that we all share in the struggle and that we should expect that struggle. And what was the research that came from the struggles, commitment, discipline, and generosity of Maureen's work? One of the important conceptual frameworks for my own research and a source of part of the title of this book came from the article, A Reconceptualization of School Effects. In the article with Sorensen, they argue that in order for learning to happen, there is a dynamic process that includes the interaction of effort, ability, and opportunity for learning. It is the opportunities for learning, or lack thereof, that can explain much of the inequality that we see. Opportunities for learning can come in so many forms: teachers and teaching, leadership, course taking, the schools students attend, and more. It's about access to those opportunities and experiences within those opportunities. But also note that it's the opportunities for learning that can be levers for change. For example, how we educate and prepare teachers impacts students' opportunities for learning. In Maureen's keynote at Marymount, she shares about her experiences as a teacher and reminds the audience that teachers can make a profound difference in the lives of their students. In other words, teachers can make a profound difference in the opportunities for learning students experience. Part of the students' opportunities for learning comes through the social organization of schools. Maureen was working on her dissertation in the late 1960s and early 70s around the time of the release of the Coleman Report and the debates around whether schools really can have an impact on student achievement. This led Maureen to focus on the impact on how school organization could impact student outcomes. Not just achievement outcomes, but also social emotional outcomes as well. Prior to the release of the Coleman Report, there had been more of a focus on those social emotional outcomes. For example, think about Life in the Classroom by Jackson and on What is Learned in School by Dreeben. But the Coleman Report's findings shifted researchers' focus more heavily and almost exclusively on achievement outcomes. But Maureen always remained interested in the social psychological outcomes as well. Part 2 of the book focuses on these social organization aspects of schools and Catholic education more specifically. And it starts to bridge the connection between the heavy theory pieces that she talks about in the part 1 of the book and more empirical research later in the book. The first few chapters are still more of that theoretical piece, and then we start to get into the testing of theories with her work on Catholic education. And her work on Catholic education earned her much recognition, including the Excellence in Research on Catholic Education Award in 2007. But as you read these empirical chapters, you will still see her use of theory in setting up the studies. In her work on the social organization of schools, Maureen was interested in the normative order. She argued the more consistent a school's normative order was with a student's social and behavioral culture, the more engaged that student was likely to be in school. And we can see elements of this today when we talk about creating a culturally relevant school culture. Students learn more when the content is related to them, when they see themselves in the lessons, and when they feel like they belong. To Maureen, the normative order socializes students. Teachers and leaders communicate about the norms of the school for the social and moral behavior that they expect within their school. But it's important to recognize that there are positive and negative aspects of the normative order of schools, which can facilitate engagement for students when the values align with the normative culture within the school, or disengagement if there's a mismatch. The bottom line, though, is that the school's normative culture needs to meet the students' cognitive and emotional needs. Maureen goes on to talk more about the normative culture specifically within Catholic schools. She argues that the normative culture and processes within Catholic schools differs from those of public schools. Her interest in Catholic education and outcomes beyond achievement measures can be clearly seen in the Chicago Catholic School Study. The Chicago Catholic School Study was a massive undertaking surveying the Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Chicago. The study included research on the role of Catholic education as outcomes, such as viewing oneself as a religious person, praying in private, participation in non-academic activities in schools, participation in religious activities in the community, and attitudes towards peers of different racial and ethnic groups. Maureen said that within Catholic schools, there exists the seeds of a social movement. The school community transmits faith and a sense of communal responsibility and social justice to the parish and neighborhood. The value of a Catholic education lies in its faith-based vision of the purpose of education, and it's instilling that vision in its students. But a Catholic education shapes not only the children, but also their families, their communities, and their neighborhoods. And ultimately, the Catholic system benefits our country, and that is a message that we want to share. Maureen truly believed in the power of Catholic schools and the impact that they can have on a variety of student outcomes and the larger community. But what is it about Catholic schools that makes them different from public schools? One is exposure to a challenging academic curriculum for all students, not just those in higher ability groups or tracks. We devote, like I said, an entire section of the book to ability grouping and tracking, so I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but I do want to note that it comes up in her research on Catholic education, as well as her research on friends and peers. So in addition to how Catholic schools organize their students for instruction, Catholic schools also tend to have a stricter discipline than public schools, so that's one of the other reasons why there's these differences. So when there's more time spent on rigorous content and less time on dealing with behavior management issues, there's more opportunities for learning. And there's also this particular sense of community within Catholic schools, which teaches students that the importance of learning and encourages and supports them in their efforts to achieve. Maureen goes on to talk more about the community within Catholic schools using Coleman's work on social capital. According to Coleman, there are 3 particular characteristics of Catholic schools that create more social capital to support student achievement than public schools have. These characteristics are size, religious commitment, and organizational structure. And these characteristics foster the parent-student networks with intergenerational social closure, with close ties among parents, teachers, and administrators. The smaller size of Catholic schools makes it easier for Catholic school parents to get to know each other and their children's friends. And the fact that Catholic schools are typically associated with a parish or a church also strengthens social ties. These organizational factors can impact how students experience school and schooling, resulting in differences in achievement and other social emotional outcomes. Maureen's research shows that schools can make a difference on student outcomes. The way that schools are organized matters. One of the ways that schools organize that keeps coming up in Maureen's research is ability grouping and tracking. Part 3 of the book is devoted completely to ability grouping and tracking, and it should be noted that while these terms are often used interchangeably, Maureen really emphasized that they are distinct organizational structures. So I'm going to quickly define them for Maureen's sake. When curriculum differentiation involves creating distinct instructional programs for students, these programs are called tracks. When curriculum differentiation involves variation across instructional units in the difficulty of course content, quantity of materials, and rate of instruction, the units are called ability grouping. Differentiating instruction is ingrained in the U.S. educational system. In theory, it makes a lot of sense. Instruction should be focused on the student's level so that they have opportunities to learn that fit their needs. Maureen and Jeannie Oakes had a debate about the theory versus practice of tracking. Maureen talks about why tracking should be good if it's implemented properly, but Oakes comes back with the issues of the implementation of tracking and the inherently inequitable nature of tracking. Tracking is often seen as a problematic practice leading to inequality, but the question is really whether the issue is the practice itself or the implementation of the practice. And with tracking, we can return to the article Reconceptualization of School Effects. Maureen argues that if there is high-quality instruction and student engagement, then the way students are organized for instructions will not matter. That is, if there's a high-quality learning opportunities and students are putting forth effort, then how students are divided won't make a difference in their learning. The dynamic is there for learning to occur. I appreciate Maureen's commitment to sharing why tracking could be good in theory for students in the debate with Jeannie Oakes. We need to critically examine our practices so that we gain a deeper understanding of the mechanisms at work that lead to differential student outcomes. While we see in the work of Maureen and others like Gamaran that tracking does lead to inequality, we also see attempts to require all students to take the same curriculum, and that doesn't work out either. For example, the state of Michigan implemented the Michigan Merit Curriculum, in which all high school students needed to take a particular set of courses such as Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 for math. But you know what? That didn't really work out either because not all algebra courses are the same. In another project that I worked on with Barbara and Ken Frank, we coded high school course catalogs to find out if algebra is algebra is algebra, and it isn't. And keep in mind, too, that what is described as the intended curriculum in course catalogs is not always the actual enacted curriculum within the classroom. There are differences in opportunities to learn even within the same track. Teachers make decisions on how they're teaching the content, and speaking of teachers, we see that there are differences in teacher and teaching quality by track. So what does this all mean? We need to be looking more at the mechanisms at work in explaining inequality in the outcomes to know if the issue is with the practice, the policies related to the practice, or the implementation of it. And if there's an issue with the policies or the implementation, then what can we do about it? When considering the mechanisms that could be at work with ability grouping and tracking, Maureen looked at multiple levels of influence on student learning. Those levels include instructional, interpersonal, and institutional. Maureen defines these for us based on Gamaran and Pallas's work. Instructional influences arise from the nature of the curriculum and from teacher pedagogical practices. Interpersonal influences on learning have occurred through the way interactions in instructional group affect students' self-image, motivation, and expectations, while the institutional influences on learning occur through the meaning and legitimization a population assigns to the institution. As we consider educational practices, it would do us well to consider the impact of each of these influences. In thinking about tracking, I also think about some of the practices that we use today. For example, my daughter's school uses iReady. The students do an adaptive benchmark test at the beginning of the year, and then they work on their own MyPath. So this adaptive computer-based testing is providing them with math and reading lessons at their level, theoretically, right? Because not all students test well, so maybe they're starting lower on their path than they should. But it's also allowing for differentiated instruction. Students are completing their path partly in school, though, so now more of their learning is individual and independent rather than social and communal. And I wonder what Maureen would say about the theory versus practice of using online programs like iReady for differentiation. In theory, it makes sense. Students get instruction at their level, and students progress at their own pace. But what are the implications of the practice? What happened to learning from each other? What are the implications for things like peer relationships and friendship formation when students are learning on their own in the same classroom? And does this vary by grade level? And that brings us to the final section of the book, peer relationships and friendships. Maureen's dissertation was on social network analysis before it became more prominent in the field. Maureen completed her dissertation in the early 1970s. In it, she asked students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to identify their best friends. With the data, she looked at the structure of the peer groups and showed how complex social groups are. Her dissertation was the foundation of her first book, The Structures of Positive Sentiment. Now, if you're listening to when I started this talk, you'll be unsurprised to learn that the book underscored the importance of developing new theories. Those theories were to explain the interrelationship between formalized representation of networks and other psychological and behavioral actions and their effects on social structures. While Maureen was emphasizing theory once again, in this section of the book we also see her complex mathematical models from her empirical research as well. Maureen's work in the area focused on the process of friendship formation, particularly in classrooms. These social ties and friendship groups are important for the classroom as they can support student learning. However, they can also form status hierarchies, which can create learning environments where students do not feel like they belong, and that in turn has implications for their opportunities for learning. As we continue to read Maureen's work about the formation of friendship, we see more and more how the social structure within the classroom impacts friendship choices. We also see from her work that whether it is elementary school or high school, students tend to form friendships by gender and race. Throughout all of the sections of the book, you see Maureen's use of theory to explain inequality and her rigorous empirical analyses, which are then tied back to her theoretical argument in the end. You will see her focus on how the social organization of schools and how interactions are related to students' opportunities for learning. You will see an emphasis on communal organization and social ties shaping the normative order of schools. You will see that schools do make a difference. By highlighting Maureen's key work and arguments, we start to see Maureen's vision and her call for us as sociologists of education. Her vision for us starts with theory as the foundation. Maureen's vision for sociologists of education is to develop theories specifically to schools and schooling. General sociological theories are too abstract, she says, and do not take into account the unique environment and population of schools. She says, theoretical explanations that explain the social processes that occur in schools would help sociologists distinguish education from other social institutions. This would contribute to the study of societal institutions in general, as well as to the studies of schools in particular. A stronger theoretical foundation would guide the selection of future research studies and would ensure greater progress in our understanding of schooling. Maureen's focus on the social structures that students interact with and in, and how that impacts their learning and development as people. We see this through her focus on the normative culture of schools, how students are organized for learning via ability groups and tracking, and how students experience schools with their friends and peers. Maureen calls for us to develop an ongoing systematic program of research that will inform educators and policymakers when they face decisions about ways to improve student learning. Anticipating the effects of societal factors on schools allows researchers to select their research judiciously. Doing so can be expected to shrink the gap between the availability of research findings and educators' needs for such findings. In order to make our research available to policymakers, we need to be anticipating the factors that will be relevant to policymakers. Once again, Maureen is challenging us. It is not enough for us to conduct rigorous research, but that research needs to be addressing factors that are relevant to a rapidly changing global society. As I reflect on Maureen's work and who she was as a scholar and trailblazer, I can't help but recognize how amazing she was. After reading her memoir, Seeking God, and rereading all of the classic works in this volume, I see the strength and perseverance that she possessed. She recognized the importance of struggle and commitment. She recognized that we need to push and challenge ourselves and others to produce theoretically sound and rigorous research to impact a variety of student outcomes. So it's conferences like this that help move us forward in our work, because conferences are a place where we can push on our ideas and others can push on our ideas, adding a little bit of struggle to the process. It's conferences like these where we can share ideas and talk about the larger talk with a larger community about the factors that are relevant to a rapidly changing global society. It is conferences like these that we need. So where do we, as sociologists of education, go from here? I go back to Maureen's introduction in the Frontiers of Sociology of Education, entitled Improving the Interaction Between Sociological Research and Educational Policy. I would like us to think about the topics that we need to anticipate for policymakers. I also think about practitioners. In my current role, my dissertation students are teachers and principals and district leaders, and their work is more often program evaluations of problems of practice within their own schools and districts. Their work has direct implications for the students in their schools and districts. So how can we ensure that the work of sociologists of education have practical implications for those in the field as well? I would like to end with reiterating a few key points from Maureen. We need good theory and we need to do rigorous research, but that is not and should not be easy. We should be struggling to produce good work because that means we're pushing ourselves to really think about the issues. We should not shy away from that work that needs to be done. We need to face those struggles with commitment and determination. We are all here to keep learning, and the struggles are part of the process. And finally, I want to end with a few words from Maureen. She says that sociology is a powerful discipline whose time has come. The characteristics of contemporary society, the newly acquired maturity and sophistication of the sociological perspective, and the increasing body of theoretical and empirical scholarship available in sociology have created the context in which sociology can be the crown jewel of the social sciences. If we take advantage of this opportunity, we can make significant contributions to contemporary society through our discipline. So how are we doing on the potential for sociology? Are we there, or is it still a work in progress? What do we need to do to ensure that we are the crown jewel of the social sciences? Thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions as well as reflections from others who also know Maureen and my co-editors as well.
Noted, very early work, and true in that sense, but also all of her work It was right. I mean, so she was doing network stuff at a time when people were getting very confused. They were doing all kinds of wacky things, and she had these tables looking at gender and friendship formation that we would do a little differently now, but not that much, and the data were strong, and she was really true to the data, and that was consistent in all of her work. And so it holds up. Those results were replicated several times, and I really appreciated that about her approach. A very, very rigorous, grounded social scientist.
Yeah.
I have more of a question and reflection, and maybe you can answer. How did you
Sorry, can you hold on? Sorry. We're recording, so we on the mic. Sorry.
Follow-up question. How did you do network analysis in the 1970s?
This is probably a good question for Ken, actually. Not something I'm familiar with. Yeah, there were nominations, and
she had started her first book, people really didn't appreciate or understand what she was doing, which was really interesting because she really was doing formation of social capital in lots of ways, because essentially what she was looking for were these ties. Of course, Ken, where'd you go? It wasn't Ken Frank, but it was certainly, it started a very different tradition in social network theory. Ken, why don't you go on?
All the fancy techniques you know now, if you've heard of exponential random graph models, they were built on, hers are the bricks that those things are built on, and they're not that much different. The results that you would get from what she did a series of fairly complex analyses, but she kind of did it manually.
Can I say a few more words,
Absolutely,
Beth?
yes,
Okay.
please do.
I have several thoughts that I'd like to say. First, I have marvelous memories of what we're doing here today. And I was very junior in the first time that I had an opportunity to come here. And Maureen was running the show. And Jim Coleman was here, and Robert Dreeben. I'm sure all these people, Charles Bidwell. There were people that all over the Midwest that would come to these sort of conferences that we had. And of course, you would stand up to give a talk. And one thing about Maureen, Eric, which I think you know well, is she never held back. So whenever people say, oh, Barbara, you're being so tough, I always think, well, not as tough as Maureen. So anyway, it's really in my heart, I have such a special place for Maureen and who she was as the president of ASA. She was a president of an organization, and she was a methodologist. She was strong. She was not afraid, and she took on whoever was giving her an issue and a problem. And Bill, you're laughing because you know that that's true. And the nice thing about her is that she was always there to provide that safety net, to push you forward. And very similar, I have a feeling, in just how Catherine's going to be in her new position that follows Mark, who definitely was like that and is like that as far as ever I've known him. So you have a wonderful place here. It produced people like Beth, who took the lead in this project and did such a great job. Beth, Mark and I are so appreciative of how you handled the two of us that could never quite even make our dates and the times and do what we were supposed to on the right deadlines. So anyway, I just am grateful for everybody in this room because you're living a tradition that was started by some very wonderful people who did some outstanding work and started sociology of education and having a real heritage and a bunch of eminent scholars that could go forward. And I so appreciate you coming. I only hope that you continue with this tradition because it's been such an important one in our field. And I'm listening to all these wonderful people give all these great papers and thinking, I did one of those a very long time ago. So to all of you, I take my hat, which I'm not wearing, but I will take my glasses off and say thank you all for who you all are and being here today and carrying on a very important tradition. And Beth, to you especially, for all the hard work you did on this and actually bringing us to appreciate someone like Maureen. I know she's looking down on me and smiling. And she said, you had to say that, Barbara, about how tough I was? Yeah, Maureen, I did. Anyway, thank you all. Take care.